Hello, I'm Dale Adams of Planning Ahead of Time, and on this week's Pat Chat, I'm talking to Isabel. Isabel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. My name is Isabel Lockhart, and I am a family celebrant based in Aberdeenshire. So I write and officiate funerals, weddings, and other celebrations of life.
Well, you're a member of the End of Life Lifers group. I think that's probably, but we met, I believe, at actually a networking event, I think, right back at the start. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it could have been a networking event of some sort. And then obviously you got brought into End of Lifers group.
Yeah, it might have been Coffin Club, it might have been Pushing Up the Daisies. I can't remember when, but it was a good few years ago. It was when I was early in my business. I set my business up, well, it was the week before lockdown, great planning. And it was round about then that I started doing a lot of online networking, and that's how we met.
Yeah. So fancy setting it up just 1 week before lockdown. So what made you set up this business?
I became a celebrant. It was after my son died. And I don't want it to go into too much details, but it was because of the poor service from the celebrant that was allocated to us after his death and how that made me feel. And I thought, no, I don't want anyone to feel that. So I trained to be a celebrant, and now I actually train celebrants as well 4 years on.
Just when you don't need it, the dogs decide that they're going to kick off. Thanks, one moment.
You actually went silent for a bit there.
Yeah, I'm going to have to cut this bit out because the dogs heard something outside and just decided to start barking. So I cut myself off. They were
The
not,
joys of having fur babies.
yeah, not doing quite so well. Get in your bed. Yeah, this when they're not so much fun. Normally in the afternoon, it's why I do the chats in the afternoon because there shouldn't be any post or anything coming, but somebody's just walked outside. Okay, so we'll go back to what you were saying. So I'll start the question again. So you set this up, no? So what made you set this business up a week before lock? No, start again, sorry.
Just say, why did I become a celebrant?
So why did you become a celebrant?
I became a celebrant. It was after my son died. That was in September 2019. And I wasn't impressed with the celebrant that was allocated to us. It was really poor service. Not on the day of the funeral. He delivered a brilliant ceremony, but it was the lead up to it, getting names wrong, not being accountable for his actions, and how that left me feeling. And mainly it was I could do better than that. So after Ben's funeral, I started looking into becoming a celebrant. And the week before lockdown, I trained to be a celebrant. Poor timing, but who knew the world was going to go into lockdown?
Well, yes, nobody could have predicted that. But I actually have heard this before about celebrants, if you like, getting names wrong and really just not knowing enough about the person to give a really sort of personalized service. So you decided that you could do it better. So you trained as a celebrant and then you set up on your own business.
Yes. So I named the business Legacy because this is Ben's legacy. Had he not died, I probably wouldn't have done this. So it was really bittersweet to start with, but it's absolutely what I love to do. But I've got a particular interest in end of life, and I think that maybe stems from my career as providing social support, and latterly I worked in care management, so that was supporting the elderly, many of whom were approaching their end of life.
Okay, so you were already in the end of life services really before then coming into celebrancy?
Yes, yes.
So you have an interest in people just putting plans in place and looking forward as to what they will need when they get towards their end of life. Is that right?
yes, it became really clear when working in care management that people don't have those conversations. Um, so my clients were elderly and actively dying, and their families. It's a hard thing to accept that your mum, your dad, or whoever it is going to die, and they would avoid having that conversations. And I remember one of my clients when I went in to see her after her diagnosis, and I sat down and I said, have you discussed your end of life with your son? She only had one child, and she went, he absolutely refuses to speak about it, but thank God you are. So we sat down and put, I mean, it wasn't a detailed plan, but it was recorded on her care plan what she wanted to happen after she died.
I think it's so important. I mean, it's the reason I set up the businesses that I have, was to try and say to people that you need to know for your own peace of mind, but also your family need to know what to do. And I mean, my interest came from I've got a mediumship background, so I've worked as a medium, and then people would come to me to find out whether or not they had done right by the person that had died, and they
Yeah.
wanted to know. And then you
Yes.
also have obviously information coming through about families where there's been problems and arguments that have been caused after someone's died, because
Mhm.
obviously nobody really knew what was wanted, and then they didn't agree as a family on what should be done, or obviously where certain items or money should go and things like this. And then a friend of mine died of suicide, and that was a catalyst then for me to take further and say, well, what do we need to have ready for people post death, so that we can give people information that they need about what we would want for the funeral, where our bank details are, who was our chiropractor, our optician, and things that people need to look at after somebody died. And then my mum got dementia, and I said, actually, that's not enough. When somebody loses capacity or they're coming towards their end of life, we need it to be planned for the end of life as well as post death. So I'm absolutely in agreement with you, and it really is the basis of what I've done and why I'm doing these chats with people as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I've planned 3 funerals in my lifetime. So my mum, she died, she was only 61. My brother died when he was 50. My son was 30 when he died. We kind of had a clue, right? But my mum, she had a will. Um, she'd once said to me, "Oh, I want to be cremated and my ashes buried where her parents were." So we did that. But other than that, we didn't know. My mum wasn't religious, but in those days, well, you went to the funeral director contacted the minister, and that was it. Now, he got my mum's ceremony wrong. He spoke about her life as a midwife. She'd never been a midwife. That's my takeaway from that funeral. My brother, he died suddenly as well, and he lived in Glasgow. We're in Aberdeenshire. He was brought up in Aberdeen, but he'd lived most of his life in Glasgow. But we took his body home from the ceremony. There wasn't a lot of people there, and it wasn't until afterwards I thought, well, that was stupidity because his people are in Glasgow. But Alan always said, oh, when I die, just throw him in a skip, which we would have done, but it's illegal. Um,
I love
Ben lived with a life limiting condition. He had cystic fibrosis. He knew he was going to have a shorter life. But anytime I tried to approach that with him, he just always said, no, it's too soon. It's too soon. And he died suddenly as well. I always say to people, the greatest gift you can leave behind, it's not a fortune in the bank. It's having your funeral planned, having your end of life wishes recorded. And before the end of life, so, do you want to be kept alive and life support? Get a plan put in place and let your people know. Get a power of attorney put in place. Have it set in your will that my funeral is planned and this is where you will find it. Because it really is the greatest gift you can leave behind. And also, and this is the analogy I use with people, if you're planning a funeral through a funeral director, it can feel like buying a washing machine from Curry's. So you go into Curry's, you say, I need to buy a washing machine. They'll say, of course, these are the models we have. Well, that's like going to a funeral director. You go into there and they will I don't want to use the word sell, but yes, they are in sales, the catalogue of coffins, the catalogue of flowers. Oh, do you want the funeral to be in a church or a crematorium? They don't say, well, would you like the funeral beside a loch because the deceased was an avid fisherman? I've officiated a funeral beside a loch because the family came to me before the funeral director.
Yeah.
So that there's so much out there that people don't know. Like, you don't have to use a funeral director. In fact, you don't have to have a funeral.
Mm. Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, I've seen some photos from your Facebook of various places that you have done your what do you say? You're officiating?
Officiating.
Officiating. So yes, I've seen on your Facebook some of the places that you've officiated. But I do agree with you completely. When I went to the funeral director for my mum, I'd already organised the coffin, organised who was doing the flowers, knew what I wanted, knew where it was going to be held, knew that I was going to have it at the crematorium first, and then for a memorial service at the church afterwards. So when I got there and they suddenly started to produce brochures, I just said, well, I don't need those. I already know where I'm ordering the coffin from. I already know that that this person's doing the flowers, and they were quite surprised. They were like, "Would you want to take this?" And I said, "Oh no, I'll be doing my own or the order of service." I said, "No, I'm creating that myself," and they were really surprised. I wrote poems for it. We adapted some of the poems and the readings that we found to suit my mom. You know, we had music that she liked, so we did it in the way that my mom would have wanted a church. We didn't know that though, because we hadn't had the discussions, because she got dementia. It seemed to creep up and then suddenly be there so quickly. It was really difficult, because when you look back, you see how it was creeping up. By the time it was diagnosed, it just seemed to be there, and it was like, where did this come from? And we hadn't got the LPA, which is a lasting power of attorney, for those who don't know, in place for her health. And we got it in place for finance. And the only good thing was that my mum could still say yes and no. And it took quite a long time before she forgot her, if you like, to, or able to say her name, her date of birth, her address. So she was telling people, and I was already going to all the consultations. So when it came to her end of life, I'd already been approved as such by her to speak on her behalf. But without that, I've heard of people where the care homes now have full responsibility for their mum's care. And even though they're the daughter and they visit all the time and they live very closely, they actually have no say in the medical care of their mum, because there wasn't a lasting power of attorney in place.
If you don't get power of attorney put in place, then you've got to go to court to get guardianship, and that can take months. I always say to people, and I mean, my favorite conversations is about death and dying. And I'll say to them, if you were to die today, do your loved one know what you want? And I would say 9 times out of 10, they'll say no. And for the 1 out of 10, I'll say, do they know what you want to wear when you're in your coffin? And they'll go, oh no, I hadn't given that any thought. I said, so what do they know? Oh, they know I want to be cremated. That's not an end of life plan. One of the most beautiful things I have ever had the privilege of doing, it was actually a friend of mine. So her dad was dying, he had cancer. So I went and met with him, and we planned his funeral. And we're in the midst of writing his eulogy together when he died. And my friend's mum said to me, that was so simple. We just handed the folder to the funeral directors and it was done. Little did we know that 6 months later I would be officiating her mum's funeral. And her mum had asked to speak with me to do the funeral planning, but then we went back into lockdown, so I wasn't allowed to visit her in hospital. But because I'd got to know her planning her husband's funeral, I'd kind of got a sense of what she wanted. So I supported our daughter and our son with the funeral planning. And I remember going to the funeral directors, and again, it was the catalogue. And although he didn't say it, you could see he was upselling. And then he spoke about the funeral cars. And I said, oh, you've just decided on taxis, haven't you? And she went, yes. And he kind of sat back and went, well, to be honest, that is the cheaper option. But the thing that I did with my friend was I helped her choose the outfit for her mum to wear, because she was aware her mum's arms were badly bruised because the amount of times that had to get a cannula in. So we found an outfit that would cover her arms, and then we went and we got her lipstick, we got her perfume, her underwear, the shoes, her jewelry, just everything. And then I said, you know, Gwen, if you want, you could take a lock of hair from your mum. Just ask them to take a lock of hair. She didn't like that idea, but people don't know that they can ask for certain things like fingerprints. You can ask the funeral director, can I come and help my mum and dad get dressed? Can I come and brush their hair? Can I get a lock of hair? Ben died suddenly and was taken to the police mortuary. So the next time I saw him was in his coffin in the funeral director. All I wanted to do was wrap my arms around him, and I couldn't do that because he was in a coffin. I later found out I could have asked for him to be lying on, you know, like a massage couch, so that I
Yeah,
could have
yeah.
actually embraced him. There's so many things that people don't know. And when you're in that stage of grief, your brain stops working for one. It goes into this really strange mode. And you feel pressured into saying yes or no to things. You're not logically working things out. Other things was, oh, you'll need a poem. Why do you need a poem? So I found a poem. Ben didn't like poetry, wasn't into that. So why would you have a poem at your wedding? So it's all these tiny little things. Choosing your coffin, what you want to wear. Do you want flowers? I knew that Ben wanted his guitar lying in his coffin, so that's what he had. So it's getting everything. Funerals aren't just for the living, they're also for the deceased. It's your funeral, have it your way.
Oh, it's lovely listening to you speak about it, because I'm literally getting goosebumps thinking it's exactly what I believe. And for me, it has to be a unique celebration of that person's life and of that person. I agree that it's for the deceased, also for the living, because I personally needed and wanted a funeral for my mum, and we all enjoyed it, which sounds so strange to say. Of course it's sad, and the hardest bit is when the hearse pulls up with the coffin in. Although you don't have to have that either. I know I was talking to somebody once, and a lovely lady also involved in end of life services, and her mum was all into sort of recycling and yeah, and basically looking after the earth. And she was basically wrapped and put in the back of an estate car. And when this lady told me, I was like, are you serious? She said, yeah. And she showed me photos and then laid flowers on it, and I was like, that's just incredible. It's incredible. But
Yeah.
people don't know these things. But for me, yeah, we had lots of flowers and people dressed in, with color. And I think it can be such a unique event that you can look back on it, as I do, really fondly. You've got the grief of them dying, but you know that you did what they would have wanted, or you did what you believe would best suit them and be an honor to them.
There's actually only three things that need to happen when somebody dies. First of all, the death must be registered at the registry office. Secondly, the body must be disposed of. So in the UK, you've currently got cremation or burial. And thirdly, when transferring the body, well, transporting the body, it must be covered so as not to cause the general public distress. It doesn't say it has to be in a coffin. And that's the only three things that need to happen when somebody dies. So everything else is added on. Funeral directors, so historically they were called undertakers because they undertook the tasks that nobody wanted, but it wasn't a job in itself. So the cabinet makers were the undertakers. The accountants were the undertakers. It wasn't a job in its own right. And it's just evolved over the years, but how it's carried out hasn't evolved that much.
Well, it sounds like anybody who gets to work with you as a funeral celebrant for their loved one we'll basically end up with a very unique, loving ceremony. And I think it would be the ideal time to give out some of your details, if you will, for people to contact you if they're interested.
Okay. And my website is legacycelebrant.org.uk. You can email me at isabel@legacycelebrant.org.uk, and it's Isabel. My mother always said the correct spelling. Or give me a call or WhatsApp 07846 689 884.
Okay, so will you just repeat the phone number again, please, Isabel?
Okay, it's 07846 689 884.
That's lovely. Well, it's been really nice to speak with you today. So thank you very much for joining me on a Pat Chat.
Thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed it.